Black Power, y'all. This is Chief Alex coming to you live with the latest episode of ProperGander. Keeping the vibe chill tonight. Trying to get 5 people in the room before we start this live stream. 5 people in the room. Where you at, though? You know I'm on video because I'm wearing like my one good sweater. Going to be talking about another Netflix show today. Nailed it. Going to be going more into detail. As soon as you get these people in the room. I promise I got better musical taste than just YouTube lo-fi hip-hop beats. I'm just trying not to get flagged for copyrighted content. And for posterity's sake, if y'all are wondering where Chief Rob went for this week's episode of ProperGander, listen, all right? If y'all were, if y'all had any respect for your host, you would be focusing all your attention on me right now. It ain't hard to go live, all right? It ain't hard to be talking about, to watch Netflix shows and then have an opinion. So for this week, you got me, Chief Alex. Gonna be talking about Nailed It on Netflix. Black Power DP. Just waiting to get 5 people in the room. I'll turn on these lo-fi hip-hop beats as soon as I get people up in the messenger. Damn. No love for Chief Alex. Mm-mm-mm. Speaking of cooking shows, I want to know how y'all get your information. Like y'all like pick up on skills for cooking, because I cook damn near all my own meals, and I could be better. Not gonna lie. Some of these shows, y'all, some of these cooking shows, I don't know. White people do some crazy shit with their food. Bet. 5 people. Let's get it started. Black Power, y'all. This is Chief Alex coming to you live with this week's episode of ProperGander. This week, we're going to be talking about another Netflix show called Nailed It. Recently came out with a new season, and I got some opinions. So depending on depending on how much you like to smoke weed in your own home, this is like Nailed It is one of those. It's a cooking show. It's one of those. It's one of those shows that falls under the category of stoner television. I say that because the budget isn't very high. Like most cooking shows, the budget is like it's not around the budget. It's just around like really stimulating those senses for like, and like just keeping people, the audience, like really chill. And this particular show, the reason they call it Nailed It is, you have a couple of different like challenges online that are trying to get people to show their baking skills, and like getting all those Instagram points, all those Facebook points for like getting a really nice photograph of some complicated ass food. And me personally, I'm just trying to get my calorie dense like protein. It doesn't have to look pretty, as long as like I'm Cuban, so like my family was just making like frijoles and rice with some pork, and that shit don't look pretty, but it gets that protein to you real fast. But Nailed It is coming off of this trend of like YouTube and Netflix cooking shows, where like everything is supposed to look good for Instagram. It's supposed to look immediately like appetizing for the camera, and especially for like people tuning in, like during a Netflix marathon, where they might be like inclined to experiment and learn how to like cook with expensive ingredients. Nailed It is coming off of that trend. You might be like logging into YouTube and you'll see like Bon Appetit, the channel Bon Appetit just pop in with like 2 million views per episode, and like all these other cooking like personalities stemming like off of like that sort of success. And then you have Nailed It, which is a baking show on Netflix hosted by Nicole Byer. And the whole premise is we get 3 different randos from off the street to attempt to construct these really expensive, elaborate, bougie ass cakes. But the point is, like, this, it's not like, you know, people who went to like cooking school, or people who like, they intentionally like research like who's putting out videos of like making cakes for their family, intentionally making sure that these people like are quote unquote amateurs, um, uh, for like their baking skills. And it's gotten like it's gotten not just like renewed on Netflix for like a 3rd or 4th season, but there are now spin-offs for a number of different like European countries. Couple of different like colonizer countries are picking up on the trend. You know, they want, you know, not just cooking shows, but they want to pick up on the trend of sort of making fun of common, like, you know, working class folks. Specifically, like they always have a lot of colonized people like coming onto the show, and it's an interesting dynamic where usually, you know, like these like all these cooking shows on YouTube or Netflix. I know, like, you know, Bon Appetit, hosted by a lot of white people in New York City. There's like what's his name, the British one, the angry ass British guy, like a Great British Bake Off, Guy Fieri, like all these like very Caucasian like cooking shows. But you have Nailed It, which is not only hosted by Nicole Byer, who is herself African, but a lot of the people like participating on the show are colonized. And, you know, that this gets me thinking, you know, why are colonized people suddenly, like, you know, on camera for a challenge that they are intentionally set up to fail? Like with all these other cooking shows, the point is to look good for the camera, but Nailed It turns that dynamic on its head. So like obviously we have to like investigate a little, become familiar with some of these tropes that are happening within like cooking shows as an online genre, but also with how Nailed It like subverts those tropes, and how that ties into a colonial mindset. So with these like other cooking shows, like I'm thinking of Bon Appetit in particular, because that channel on YouTube like is dominating on that online genre of cooking shows, where I'm sure we all have like the image in our head of what that, like, of how the setup goes for a particular video. You have your this or that like New York personality, someone like an upper middle class personality for the camera, who is going to teach the viewer how to make a particular dish, maybe like most likely an obscure dish, most likely like some variation on an ethnic dish, but not just like, you know, a home cooked like version of like how we as colonized people might be familiar with these dishes, with the ingredients that are available to us specifically. Part of the setup is that they are in like these personalities are in these expensive ass kitchens using heretofore unknown ingredients for their dishes. Like they might be making, like, you know, tamales as you know, but like with the colonizer spin on it. like using like organic superfood additions for shit that like colonized people like wouldn't even be able to find in like the stores that we shop in at, like adding almond flour, kale, all this extra shit. Yeah, I know. No, everyone loves tamales, Robert. You ain't special. But so like that's the point of the show. It's to flex on the audience of like the kind of budget that they have to get these ingredients and the kind of tools that are available to them, like these utensils and ingredients and different techniques that like produce this produce these foods that to colonized people are unrecognizable variations of this like food that we're familiar with. Like we're like obviously we've had hundreds if not thousands of years to perfect some of these foods, like a lot of stuff from India, from Africa, from the so-called like Americas. These traditional foods are made unrecognizable because so much money has been put in. Whether or not it tastes better, in my opinion, it doesn't look like it tastes better, but to flex on people that this is the kind of resources that the producers of these shows have available to them, which like is like glorifying the gentrification of food. When colonized people, especially people watching the shows in the United States of America, like all of us are familiar with food deserts, and a majority of the world, people like especially people not living in this country are damn familiar with hunger and scarcity. So to not only focus on food let's not only focus on food that is stolen from us, but to make it yet more unavailable, even more scarce, by producing it through these like uber expensive like processes, is like just sort of a slap in the face to everyone who isn't a colonizer, because we all know they'd be stealing all like not like everything, even like the ingredients for food. Like colonizers ain't got shit on like not even on their recipes. Like if not for colonized people, they'd be eating like raw onions and shit like and starving to death in Europe, if not for the recipes and food that they stole from colonized people. But so on top of that, we have a show like Nailed It, which is not only cashing in on this trend of cooking shows, on internet cooking shows, but is subverting that expectation of making the food look good for the camera, and how that ties into like a colonial framework. Because we here at ProperGander, we analyze all of this media from an anti-colonial framework, like understanding how colonialism wants to implant these ideas into our heads through TV, movies, books, and we want to analyze that, break it apart, so that we can see the brainwashing for what it is. Like Nailed It, even though the contestants on this show are expected to make the food and are like set up to fail, where like these cakes that they're building are so absurdly hard to make and so complicated that there's no way they could possibly succeed. The way this still ties into a colonial conflict is it's might be a subversion of people making food that we're supposed to eat. Like the contestants are not making food that, you know, we are going to enjoy eating. It's to create a comparison between, because they always show us the template. Like they always bring in like this expensive, huge cake to serve as the model for what the contestants are supposed to be making. And that's always like the first thing we see before we even get to like what gets made later on. The quote unquote, like, you know, failures happening. We always get a shot of this complicated and expensive cake, like a pastry that should have cost like thousands of dollars to produce in terms of like what we might see this paid for, like, oh, you know, in some bougie ass wedding or like celebrity event. Like that is the classic setup that we're familiar with. And Nailed It is adding on top of that, is adding the audience into the show, and like a lot of whom are colonized people, like participating in this show for a chance to win $10,000 for being made fun of, essentially, on camera. Where now we're like in these other formats, you just had the food and the expensive background and the expensive tools. We now have a comparison between like that level of funding and the audience. So like that gulf is made more apparent to the people watching Nailed It. Only it's framed in such a way where this gulf in money and skill is supposed to be humorous to us rather than like deeply frustrating and insulting. Like the producers of this show got an African woman to host a show featuring poor and working class colonized people to aid in the humiliation of these contestants, and putting them in a position where they're willing to humiliate themselves on camera for $10,000. And it's the $10,000 that, you know, is really the key component in this framework that I find the most frustrating, because, you know, $10,000 to me, God, like $10,000 is, you know, to most people, like not even to just colonized people living in the United States, to the vast majority of the global population, which is colonized people, $10,000 is an obscene amount of money. It is enough money to not just like sustain you and your family. It would be enough money to sustain your community. And it's sort of dangled, it's sort of dangled in front of the camera as, like, you know, as an amount that is worth, making a fool of yourself on television. Which, yeah, we have to think about, like, you know, they factor in, like, the producers of this show, are factoring in these $10,000 into the budget, like, you know, it, like, on top of, you know, paying for the set and paying for Nicole Byer's budget and all this food, and like all of these extra expenses, $10,000 is added on top of that. And, you know, for us poor and working class colonized people who are distracted by like how much money $10,000 is to us, to the people producing this show, it's chump change. It's like pennies that they're throwing like onto the ground to watch poor and working class colonized people fight over for entertainment. So like, yeah, even Nicole Byer, an African woman who I can't find her net worth online, but you know, people put it like the figure of like what she makes yearly in terms of like she's a comedian, so like what she makes in comedy and like what like her annual salary would be like in the hundreds of thousands, which is again to poor and working class colonized people an unthinkable amount of money. Like, you know, we who like can't even fathom having like $1,000 in a savings account look at, you know, $200,000 and like our minds can't wrap our heads around that much money. But even Nicole Byer is like is a small fish compared to like what, like when I say producer, I don't mean the people in front of the camera. I mean everyone behind the camera, like putting all these people on payroll, pulling all the staff and the camera people and the advertisers and like all of this labor being like put into this show, paid for by the producers. In this case, all the producers belonging to Netflix, which, you know, if like the estimate I found online, and again, this is not like reliable, but like hundreds of thousands of dollars for Nicole Byer's salary, like including what she makes from this show. So even if it's just say like $100,000, like flat 100,000, still like more chump change in compared to Netflix, which spends billions of dollars on original programming. Netflix trying to like, you know, put out original programs like Nailed It, like, and spending like 2, 3, 4 to like make these shows, to make sure that especially in times like these when we're like quarantined due to like COVID-19, making sure that we are glued onto our laptops for as long as possible to be raking in that money. So like $10,000 to the people who own Netflix is not even pennies. It's like $1 billion to 10,000 is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the kind of wealth that is available to these people. Like the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, as like is like according to Forbes, is worth $4.7 billion. $4.7 billion. $4.7 billion. And like, and the people coming onto the show are supposed to compete for 10,000. And I want you to think about that, because I know people watching the show are going to think like $10,000, that is like, that's more than, that's, you know, that's more than I make like in 4 or 5, 6 months. That's like, for some people, like in other colonized countries, like outside of America's borders, like that's like $10,000 is more than you would ever make in your lifetime. That's more, if you would put all that in a stack, that is more cash value than some colonized people, most colonized people on this planet would ever see in their lifetimes. They would live and die and never even see that much value in one place, let alone the types of food that is being celebrated on this show. Like, again, we have to think about like what we are supposed to value when watching this show. Like when people are failing to like uphold a certain standard, like these values aren't neutral. We like are expected to see these like lavish, elaborate cakes, which have no nutritional value and are just filled with like sugar and all of this and all of this unnecessary like wasteful calories, and that is supposed to be like what we idolize, and the people brought onto the show to emulate that. Like, we are supposed to laugh at them for failing to uphold this obscene standard of what food is, quote unquote, supposed to look like. And so to think like, and to put that in comparison to the type of budget that Netflix has to throw around to keep us glued onto that kind of of stream of shame is staggering. Putting that into comparison, like at that point, competition becomes like a sort of like a joke to the white ruling class. This opportunity to give away a part of our like humanity for, you know, what is essentially chump change to the white ruling class, for an opportunity to attempt to make food that is of use to no one, but still costs more money than all of us make in like a month, really shows like the decadent values of the bourgeoisie. But you know, that's just me. And yeah, this I ain't got much more to say on Nailed It. If y'all check the comments. Yeah, let us know like in the comments, or like hit us up on Facebook at blackhammer.org and give us some suggestions for other media, shows, movies, video games, books, podcasts, the suggestions that you want to see being talked about on ProperGander, a show, an anti-colonial show that is representing Black Hammer, an organization for the poor and working class colonized masses of the world. We are coming to you live every single week. And thank you all for tuning in. Again, my name is Chief Alex. And I will be signing off.